Welcome back to low-code Fiori applications development with Neptune software. And as I told you in the last video, we're going to start with an overview of the Neptune DX platform here. So in this section, we will complete the following tasks. We'll get an overview of what the Neptune DX platform really is. And I want you to understand the business case for the Neptune platform, because if your company is anything like mine, and I'm sure it is, you're going to be challenged with, why another UI5 or another web app development platform, right? There's several of them out there. If you're an SAP company, you probably already are invested in Fiori, like my company was. And so it's right of my peers to challenge me on this, and I want to help you build that case because I think there's a lot of advantages. I think the Neptune platform fits or fills a gap that the SAP Fiori platform leaves a void in. So I want to help you build that business case. So first off, what is the Neptune DX platform? Well, as you can see in the picture above, there's really two products, and you'll see the P8 and P9. This is terminology that Neptune actually doesn't use anymore. They have two products. They have one that sits on top of the SAP stack, which is known as their SAP edition. Previously, it was called Planet 8. But within the last few months, they've actually gone away from the Planet 8, Planet 9 naming of the two platforms, and they simply refer to them now as the SAP Edition and the Open Edition. The main difference is the SAP Edition sits on top of the SAP NetWeaver stack. It uses the native ABAP SAP language, and it communicates with the client browser through the ICF methodology or ICF framework within SAP. The Open Edition, the cockpit looks and feels the same. It uses the same UI5 components, but it's an Open Edition because it sits on top of any Node.js server. So if you're not necessarily an SAP shop or you want to make connections to systems that are non-SAP systems, the Open Edition will connect to any database, any system, and is a little bit more of a flexible option if you're not so much an SAP shop. As my banner down at the bottom says, the focus of this course, though, is going to be the SAP edition. That's the edition that I'm most familiar with and the edition that I've rolled out at my company. So high level, though, what is Neptune? It's a rapid application development platform producing UI5 style apps. These are custom apps that you can develop and grow at scale using a simple drag and drop designer. And the drag and drop designer is why we say it is low code, because it's literally, you've got the UI5 libraries on the left side, you're dragging them over and building your application and building your screens, and then you're right clicking on the different elements. A property screen comes up, and that's how you can bind it to the backend controls. It's available in desktop or mobile app. They also have progressive web apps that you can build. They also have offline apps, which I'm going to really get into in a separate video towards the end, because we've found that there's a lot of advantages to offline apps, specifically in field service areas, plant maintenance areas, where the users are not always on a Wi-Fi signal, right? They're out in the field, there's no Wi-Fi signal, there's no data signal. Being able to do their work without interruption is really key. So why another UI5 development platform? I mentioned this when I said I was going to help you with the business case. And so let me just simply give you my own story, and hopefully you can glean from that and build your own business case. But I was handed the SAP Fiori platform about 5 years ago when the previous owner left the company I was working for. And when I immediately started with the Fiori platform, I wanted to understand, where we were as a company in terms of adoption and development. What I found was our adoption rate for Fiori was pretty low. There was really only a couple of departments in our company that had started doing any development whatsoever. And so, the natural curiosity started spinning in my head, and I'm thinking, well, why, if this is such a great tool, is the adoption rate low and the development's so stagnant? And what I've figured out is the Fiori model, it checks some of the boxes in terms of our IT strategy as well as our business strategies, but there was a big void that it was missing in our strategies, and so I've kind of listed out what my company's strategies were, both from an IT standpoint and a business standpoint, and I'll talk a little about the boxes that it checked and the ones that it didn't. Obviously, you see desktop and mobile down there, and Fiori certainly checks that box. It can do both desktop as well as mobile apps, but for example, existing IT investments, we were an SAP shop. We had a pretty large ABAP pool available to us that had a good amount of our knowledge base, right? Because they had developed all these SAP GUI Z transactions and ABAP reports for us. And Fiori's not really an ABAP tool, okay? When you are developing Fiori, you need, yes, your back end ABAP developers, but the majority of the development is done on the front end with your front end web developers, your JavaScripters. You also need a skill set to develop your OData, because OData, or gateway services, is how the front end and back end communicate with each other with Fiori apps. And we just didn't have an investment as an IT organization in front end web developers. We were all ABAP developers. The other thing it really didn't check is simple security. You can certainly secure Fiori apps, but it required another service. It required some type of identity provider service, and so we then had to go out and connect the Fiori applications with our LDAP services, right? If you're using LDAP or some other type of identity provider, so it just wasn't easy. It required multiple integrations. We were doing it in the SAP Cloud also, so it required us to use the SAP Cloud Connector, as well as principal propagation, X509 certificates, and that kind of stuff to completely secure the front end, to completely secure the back end from the front end. So security was something that I didn't feel we were able to check that box with Fiori. And then offline first. Offline was big for us. We're a manufacturing consumer products goods company, and there's always spots in our plants where Wi-Fi signals aren't good, and we had to come with a offline first mentality. On the business side of the equation, Fiori was not agile. It was more of a waterfall approach. We could not do sprints every 2 weeks where we're bringing something new to the business. It was more like a 6-month project, right? And our business very much wanted to be first to market. They could put a dollar amount on being first to market, and we didn't feel at the speed that we were developing in Fiori that we could ever say, hey, we're first in the market, or we can get first to the market when a new innovation idea occurs. Low cost and scalable. I mean, this one, can be somewhat argumentative, but the pricing model for Fiori was very expensive, right? Even to do a proof of concept, we were going out and getting bids from integration partners that were, $200,000-$300,000 for a proof of concept, right? And that just did not work for our business model, especially for a proof of concept where we didn't even know whether we were going to scale this thing or not. So, hopefully I've whetted your appetite here on how you can build a business case for a rapid application development platform like Neptune software with your business. Neptune, I'll tell you, is quickly becoming a leader, recognized as a leader in the multi-experience development platform area. They now have been recognized by Gartner in their Magic Quadrant 2 years running. They've also been recognized as SAP, even though they are what I would call a substitute for SAP Fiori. They are an SAP partner, certified partner, and they've won several SAP awards, including the SAP Solution Innovation Award, Gold Award in 2018. And so when I went to my business group, I knew that I had to, somehow convince them that changing platforms wasn't going to be this drastic change. And so I thought in the back of my head, how can I do this? And really what I came up with is I just wanted to do a blind test for them. And I said, okay, I'm going to take a Neptune app and I'm going to take a Fiori app, put them side by side, and I want you to tell me which is which, right? And so I did a test very similar to what you're seeing here. And this was the results. And the top one was the Neptune app, the bottom one was the Fiori app. But again, I go back to the fact that there really isn't any difference from a UI experience because they're both using the SAP UI5 libraries. Neptune uses the same SAP UI5 libraries. When SAP rolls out a new element to the library, within a matter of a week or so, you'll see that same UI5 element added to the Neptune library. So there really isn't a difference from a user experience standpoint whether you're using Neptune or Fiori. Okay, well, that concludes the end of this video, and I'm going to stop this video. When we come back, I'm going to deep dive into the systems architecture of the Neptune applications. Welcome back to Low-Code Fiori Applications with Neptune Software. I'm your instructor, Matthew Hunt. And as I said in the last video, we're going to deep dive on this video into the systems architecture. So in this section, you will complete the following task. I'll give you an overview of the Neptune architecture, and then we'll compare and contrast the Neptune architecture to the Fiori architecture, and I'll call out some of the benefits that I see with Neptune over Fiori. And then finally, I'll show you a couple different models for how you can deploy Neptune on your own back-end SAP stacks, how you can expose it to the internet, and that type of thing. So in this first slide here, I'm showing the systems architecture for how Neptune is installed. And as I said, it's installed right on the SAP NetWeaver stack. It installs using the SAP transaction, the Saint transaction. So it's just like any other type of SAP add-on that your company may deploy. It works with any SAP NetWeaver stack. The recommended or preferred option is 7.0, but they have, I believe I heard them say they've installed it on something as far back as a 4.6 system, and it worked. But know that it's both backwards and future-proof. So when I say future-proof, it's been thoroughly tested on S4. So, you don't, if you start off with Neptune on an ECC 7 system and you migrate in a year or two to an S4 system, know that you don't have to redevelop these apps. Everything is future-proof. Okay, so the code that you're developing in the ECC stack will transfer without any problem, without any changes to your S4 system. What's kind of the nuts and bolts behind the architecture? Well, how it communicates, how the back-end core ABAP communicates to the client browser, as I mentioned in the other video, is with the ICF framework. So the Internet Communication Framework that is native to SAP. And Neptune has a dedicated node on the SICF. So if you go to that transaction SICF and you've installed Neptune, you'll see a dedicated node there for Neptune. Applications are migrated using the SAP Transport Management System. So this was huge to IT nerds like myself. How do we manage the life cycle, the transport mechanisms of deploying applications to a 3-tier architecture or 3-tier landscape of dev, QA, and production, right? Without losing track of what version we're on and that kind of stuff. And so when you deploy Neptune, the applications themselves use the transport management system built into the SAP NetWeaver system. So also if you're using Charm, which is part of the Solution Manager product, you can use Charm, which my company uses Charm, and that's a great tool for controlling how you transport stuff from dev to QA to prod. Security is based on SAP security roles. So in the last video, I said simplified security. I didn't have to recreate any new SAP security roles when I deployed Neptune. When we started creating apps, we tie those apps to the existing SAP security roles that are already created to secure transactions or Z transactions in the SAP GUI system. So I didn't have to create any new roles. It was very easy for my SAP security team to be onboarded because we just use those PFCG roles. If you're familiar with that transaction, that's the role management builder in SAP. We just use those existing SAP security roles. So I'm going to show you some of these bubbles will pop up here in a minute. These are the wins, I think, for Neptune. These are the things that make the Neptune architecture stand out to me above the Fiori architecture. And first of all, we were empowering our ABAP developers to turn really any ABAP code into a RESTful API that could be used in a Neptune app or a Fiori app or any application software that needed access. We could go in and we could take existing ABAP code. So if you think about that, if you're an ABAP developer, any of the existing BAPIs that you have, so BAPI material get list is a big one. BAPI stock requirements material to retrieve your stock requirements list. Those are things that external systems, other systems are always needing from us. And I could take those existing BAPIs, wrap them in an ABAP class, and in like 5 minutes, I've created a RESTful API that any other application can call that endpoint. Okay, so this was huge for us, and I would imagine it could be huge for you guys also. Full SAP compatibility backwards and future proof. I already mentioned it's S4 compliant. You're not going to have to rewrite your code. Avoid complexities because Neptune uses SAP security, transport management, and no OData. So I mentioned OData earlier, I think in the last video. OData and the SAP gateway, for that matter, is how the front end and back end communicate with each other in Fiori. Because Neptune is installed directly on the NetWeaver stack, because it uses the native SAP ABAP language, it does not require OData. OData is a skill that most ABAPers don't have, and a skill that most front-end web developers don't have. So if you're doing a Fiori project, you're probably, at a minimum, you've got 3 different developer skill sets on your team. You've got a front-end web developer, you've got an OData developer, and then you've got your back-end ABAP developer. So with Neptune, the first Neptune app that we deployed in our proof of concept, we used one developer, one ABAP developer, and in 3 we sent them to a course that lasted 3 days, and within a 3-day or after a 3-day course, they came back, and in 3 weeks they developed a full Neptune app. So one resource who was an ABAP developer learned how to use this Neptune Neptune application development platform in a matter of 3 days. So the platform is very easy to learn, especially for ABAP developers. I started saying to my ABAP team, hey, this is a platform developed by ABAPers for ABAPers. Last thing, it runs faster because you are using the native ABAP on top of the NetWeaver stack. You don't have to go through the OData. So just the latency time that you sometimes see with Fiori when the front end is trying to communicate with the back end, that goes away. I ran some ABAP reports directly in the SAP GUI, and then I turn those ABAP reports into Neptune applications, and I got the exact same run times. Okay, so my front end applications in Neptune were running at the exact same speed, the exact same response time as my back end, as if I was running the transaction from the SAP GUI. In this slide, I'm showing you, this is on the left-hand side, the Fiori architecture, and this is a pretty common slide. It's available in a lot of Fiori documentation, but it's showing you just the different ways of deploying Fiori. And you'll see in all of the Fiori deployments, the SAP Gateway, as I said, that's a requirement to do Fiori. Over on the right-hand or left-hand side, you're seeing the Neptune architecture. You can see the app designer, the front end, and the back end ABAP are all in the NetWeaver stack. It's much simpler, much easier to develop on. And here's a couple different deployment options. The most common one on the top there, if you're using this internal, you've got an internal launchpad. You're on your VPN or you're on your network and you're communicating directly with Neptune just like you would be logged into SAP. If you want to use this externally, the most common setup is to use a reverse proxy in a DMZ and then route your internet HTTP traffic through the reverse proxy to hide your backend web domain servers. If you're deploying Neptune to multiple backend systems or you're wanting to connect to multiple backend systems, one of the most common ways is to actually set up a gateway. So as I said, Neptune can be installed on any NetWeaver stack. And so you can deploy this on a gateway server, and then you can do RFC calls to any backend SAP ECC or BW system or CRM system. Okay, this wraps up this video. I'm going to stop this video. When we come back, we're going to get into the first video on the cockpit. Hi, and welcome back to low-code Fiori applications using Neptune software. I'm your instructor, Matthew Hunt. And these next 3 sections, we're going to deep dive into the cockpit. And I've kind of grouped things together. The first section is called Getting Started, where we'll look at connectivity and development. The next section will be Going Live. This will be things like securing your applications, building your launch pads, your cards, your card groups. And then the final overview of the cockpit will be special features. This will be like building the offline apps, monitoring your applications, using the Neptune store, as well as I'll introduce you to the Neptune community. So let's get started on this section called Getting Started. And actually, I'll preface this and tell you that I'm probably going to do 2 different lessons here just because each one of these topics, connectivity and development in themselves, is pretty large. And I don't want the videos to be too big. So this first lesson is going to focus on connectivity, and then there'll be a second lesson under the same section called development. So real quickly, overview of what we're going to learn in this section. You'll learn how to manage the whole application lifecycle all in one place. I'll show you how to connect your apps to other systems, including non-SAP systems. Deep dive into the app designer tools, and then I'll show you how to turn any ABAP report into a Neptune application using no code. So first, let's talk about the application lifecycle. You'll see here the different aspects of the application lifecycle. It usually starts with development, then deployment, testing, integration, monitoring, and security. With other platforms, let's just take Fiori, for example, because we've done a lot of comparing to Fiori's platform. These different life cycles are sold as microservices, and they're usually sold as separate subscriptions that you have to buy. With Neptune, the whole application life cycle is built into one place. It's in the Neptune cockpit, and all of the things that you need to manage the life cycle come with your subscription to Neptune. So it's an all-in-one place. It's all included in your subscription. Everything you'll ever need to do to manage the application lifecycle. So this next screen that I'm showing here is the home page when you first come into the Neptune cockpit. As you can see, it tells you, what version you're running, how many licensed users you have. And on the left side of the screen, you'll see a menu tree. And what I'm going to do here in a minute is I'm going to explode the different elements of this tree diagram. And we're going to start with connectivity first. So under the connectivity menu, this is all the ways that Neptune has of connecting to other systems. And there's really three ways to connect to other systems, and I'm going to go through each one. First one is with an RFC destination. And so this is if you're needing to connect to another SAP NetWeaver system. That you can make RFC calls to, and it's really pretty easy to set this up. What you do is you've got your ABAP class that your code is calling with some type of AJAX call. So there's usually like a button on your Neptune app that you push. It has an AJAX call to a method on this ABAP class, and then the code within that method is making an RFC call. Just to give you a use case from my own experience with this, we were developing a shortage report, and we needed to get some data about materials from our business warehouse. And we didn't have an instance of Neptune on our business warehouse. We only had it on our ECC system. But what we were able to do is we created an RFC destination to that BW instance, and we were actually able to pull data back from those HANA views on that BW system into ECC. And once the data is in ECC, then it's accessible to your Neptune applications. So real easy to do. They actually have a variable or I'll say dynamic configuration for those RFC destinations. So when you migrate from dev to QA production, typically your RFC destinations change with the system. So there's a way to make it dynamic so that you're not having to create a separate set of code or a separate ABAP class for each dev QA production system. The second thing is where you see REST API, and so REST APIs are quickly becoming the leader, I would say, in integration methodologies, integration technology. And so Neptune has a really, really nice way for you to use the ABAP code that you already have, or maybe it's not custom ABAP code, maybe it's an existing BAPI, and package that into a REST API so that you can have an API endpoint for other applications. If you're using the Neptune Open Edition, which I talked about in the first video, your Neptune Open Edition applications can actually call these API endpoints that you're creating on the SAP system and execute any of your ABAP reports or your BAPIs, whatever. Really great tool. If you use the API designer, it's a low-code method. If you use the API factory, it's a no-code option. So great way to expose existing ABAP code or existing BAPIs. And there's a lot of BAPIs that we all use out there. BAPI material get data. is one that I know of that is used a lot. It's retrieving all the information from your material master. Think about all the applications that are wanting information from your SAP material master, right? Here's a way of creating an API endpoint with no code or low code, and being able to call those APIs. API Factory, API Designer. So API Designer is the low-code tool. API Factory is a no-code option. Integration card testing. This I'll actually talk about a little later on in a video, but this is a way of turning your dashboards. Turning your launch pads into dashboards. If you think about executive C-suite type people, they're always looking for KPIs on a dashboard, okay? And so you can create integration cards that calls your backend ABAP reports, and it displays the results of those, displays the results of that ABAP report in an actual card on a dashboard. So you can have like a top 5 list or top 10 list if it's returning like an ALV type report, and actually display that in your Launchpad dashboards. Swagger UI, this is a way of testing your APIs. You may be more familiar with the formal name of Swagger. It used to be called Open API. This isn't a Neptune specific tool. This is an open source tool, but it's a really good tool to test API endpoints after you've developed them. And there's a way to test those by jumping directly to Swagger from your Neptune cockpit. Okay, the third and final connection option is OData. And I talked a little about OData when we talked about the architecture differences between Fiori and Neptune. Neptune does not require OData. Fiori does require OData because it requires the gateway services to for the front end and the back end to communicate with each other. And so really where you would use OData is if you've already got existing Fiori applications and you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You've already got OData out there. You want to use a Neptune app for something that you've already written OData for. Neptune understands that a lot of their customers are already invested in Fiori and they want to make the most of their existing investments. So they do also allow connectivity through OData. So those are the 3 options for connecting with Neptune apps. And I'm going to end this video, and on the next video when we pick it up, we're going to talk about the low-code app designer. Welcome back to low-code Fiori development using Neptune software. I'm your instructor, Matthew Hunt. And in the last video, in this section, we were talking about connectivity. And we're going to work our way down the tree node now to the next node, which is development. And under the development, there's a number of things. The app designer, which is a low-code drag-and-drop app designer. I'm going to deep dive more into this one on the next slide, so I'm going to just pass over that one briefly. The Neptune store. So this is where you can download hundreds of pre-built apps. So the great thing about this is if there's an application that your business wants and it's already available on the store, you can download it. And even if it's not exactly what they want, maybe they want to tweak it a little, it's usually still faster to download that pre-built app and make a few tweaks here and there versus building it completely from scratch. Although you can build an app completely from scratch if that's what you want to do. The theme import, this is a theme designer tool, so if your company wants to do some corporate branding on its launch pads or its applications and you want it to be consistent across all the apps and all the launch pads, this is where you can build that theme using the theme designer tool and then import it to all the applications or all the launch pads. Same with color designer, that kind of goes hand in hand with the theme import. So this would be where you can build new color palettes and that kind of stuff. I'm going to skip resources and then drop down to the final one that's called deployment. So within the deployment node, there's an import-export And this is where, so in one of my previous videos, I said the applications are migrated to Dev, QA, production via the SAP Transport Management tool. However, launch pads and all the launchpad artifacts like the theme imports, the digital media, so any corporate logos, as well as the cards, card groups, security policies, that kind of stuff. Those artifacts are actually migrated from Dev to QA to Prod via an export-import feature. And if you think about it, you don't want everybody to have this access. Typically, only the admins have the access to export and import because you don't want just every developer being able to change your launch pads or change your corporate themes, right? And so typically the export import is not given out to just every developer or every user. It's typically an admin only type of thing. All right, so I skipped over the low-code app designer tool in the previous slide because I wanted to really show you what it looks like, and this is the nuts and bolts of where a developer really is at most of the time, and it actually will open up in a separate window from the cockpit when you launch it, but. High level here, so working from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. On the left side, you've got your UI5 libraries, and you'll see these are the exact same UI5 libraries that you would see in Web IDE if you were developing on the SAP Fiori tool, and so from the left side, you would drag and drop stuff over into the next pane over to it on the right side. And as you can see, you're really building your application, and it goes in a hierarchical order. So anything in the list prior to it or that's a higher parent node would have precedence over any type of lower node. So just kind of deciphering here this example, this is a single page application that contains a header, a list, and a footer. Okay, and then in the middle, the third column from the left, this is the preview pane. So as you're developing the app, you can always quickly flip to a preview, and it will actually show you what your app's going to look like. You can also show it in mobile view. So if you want to actually see it on what it would look like on a mobile device, so like an iPhone or something like that, it has those options for preview also. Furthest to the right, furthest to the right, that column is the attributes section. And so how the app designer works is as you bring elements, UI5 elements over into the application, you click on them and this attributes list will pop up, okay? And one of those attributes is always binding. Binding is the most important thing because binding is how you attach a back-end SAP object to the front-end UI5 element. So in this example, this application is wanting a list. So more than likely it's wanting data from a table or an internal table from SAP. So for that particular list, you would click on it, you would go over to the attributes, you'd go down to where it said binding, and you would enter the name of the table, or you could search if you don't know the exact name of the table, but you would enter the name of that table, and then as easy as that, the front-end UI5 element is bound to the back-end SAP object, so that when an AJAX call is made, it knows exactly which SAP object it's retrieving data from. Okay, well, that is the end of this lesson on development. When we come back, we will go into a new section on the cockpit called Going Live. So I will see you there. Welcome back to Low-Code Fiori Applications with Neptune Software. I'm your instructor, Matthew Hunt. And this video is going into the cockpit, and we're going to talk about the artifacts that you'll work with in order to go live in production with your applications. So in this section, we'll complete the following task. I'm going to demonstrate to you how to assign security roles to your applications, and then I'm going to show you how to create artifacts like the launchpad, the cards, as well as card groups. So we talked in the last video about connectivity and development. That was the heavy lifting. That's where your developers are really creating the apps and connecting, pulling in the data from different SAP systems. The security is this is going to be a much shorter video, just because it's a very easy process, to be honest with you. So how we secure Neptune apps is we use the PFCG roles that are already there, that your users are using to run their SAP GUI transactions today. So you create a policy in Neptune. So you would click on the policy, it would come up, you'd say, create a new policy, you would name the policy. As a general rule, this is some advice I'll give you. I typically do a one-for-one between a Neptune policy and a PFCG SAP security role. And I actually name them the same thing. So in this example, you see the policy is called ZES :log:_D _. That's the exact name of a PFCG role in my backend SAP system. I found that if you do this, it keeps it much, much simpler. Now, you're going to have more policies, but it's easy to manage them because the policy is named the exact same thing as the PFCG role. You know exactly who has access to it. Okay. There are other ways, though. It doesn't just have to be a PFCG role. That is the most common way. You can actually add a user ID directly to a policy. So, whatever your user ID is in the SAP system, you can come in here and you can, instead of saying add role, you can say add user, right? And I can key in somebody's user ID, and only that user has access to whatever applications or launchpads this policy is tied to. The third way, and this is probably the most uncommon, but you can also add function modules. So if you've written a custom function module for security, maybe that function module calls some type of authorization object, you can actually add those function modules to this policy. And you can really mix and match. You can add roles, you can add users, you can add function modules all to the same policy. You can void my advice, and you can create as many roles, or you can add as many roles, as many users, as many function modules as you want to the same policy. It doesn't have to be a one-for-one. I am just recommending to you that the one-for-one approach seems to work best for my company. Now, so that was it for the security menu. The run menu, this is where you create your launch pads, your mobile launch pads, your cards and card groups. I know over in the left it says tile groups. That's kind of the old verbiage or the old language. They used to call them tiles and tile groups. Fiori started this. The new language is they call them cards and card groups. So by clicking on the tile button, you can create a new card. You can create a dynamic card, an integrated card. This is where you tie an application to the launchpad with a card. So if you're familiar with a Fiori style launchpad, and I'll show you one here in a minute, you've got multiple cards, typically under a card group. Then the tile group is, just as the name suggests, that's how you create your card groups or your tile groups. So you lump or you aggregate multiple tiles under a card group. A card group usually represents a function or a department, right? So I may have a card group called sales, right? Or I may have a card group called manufacturing. You can actually create a nested card group, so you can create card groups within card groups. So I could have a higher level card group called manufacturing. I could then have a sub card group underneath that called material planning, which contains all the applications that my material planners in the plant use. I could then have another sub card group underneath that called production scheduling, where all my production schedulers go, and all the applications tied to production scheduling then are under that card group. Launchpads and mobile clients. So the Launchpad feature is a desktop Launchpad. So if you are developing applications that are primarily only going to be used by users or desktop clients, then you would create a desktop Launchpad. If you're creating mobile launchpads or applications to be used on mobile devices, then you would create a mobile launchpad. Now, a mobile launchpad can be used from a desktop, and I know a lot of people that actually only create mobile launchpads. They don't create desktop launchpads because the mobile launchpads can be called from a web browser. And that way you've only got one launchpad, right? I think there's enough difference between the two that I create both. And the neat thing about Neptune is I don't have to recreate the application, right? I create the application once and I can deploy it to a desktop launchpad. I can deploy it to a mobile launchpad. So it's very easy to have both. I think the differences between the two are enough that for my sake, I always create two. But, you know, there's people out there that say, no, I just want to do mobile launch pads, even if it's being called from a desktop. The last thing then is analyze, and this is a tool to help you analyze app usage, and you can see app usage by user ID. You can see it by time, so you can see just how many people are logging in and using it. You can see which users are using it. You can see how long they're using it. So that's a nice little feature, especially for architects like myself who are wondering, who's using these apps that we're developing, how long are they using them, can we improve any, right? So that's a nice little feature that Neptune has. And then I said I would show you some examples. So up at the top, here's an example of a Neptune Launchpad. You can see it's got a card group called main category and multiple cards or tiles deployed underneath that. So each one of those white little boxes is an individual card or an individual application that you would run. The one at the bottom, this is more of an example of a launchpad that's been turned into a dashboard. So I said you could use these things called dynamic tiles or integration cards to actually run ABAP reports in the back end on a schedule. So I can say, hey, I want my dashboard to refresh every 5 minutes. Or I can say, hey, I want my individual tile to update every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever you schedule it for. And it's actually going to run that ABAP report in the back end and bring back results. And I can put those results either in a list, so I could have like a top 10 list if it was like an ALV type list report. I can also show the data in graphical formats. So you can see I've got some bar charts there. I've got some pie charts. So there's lots of options, but this is an example of how you can use a Launchpad to create dashboards for your executives to show KPIs. So this is the end of the runtime or the going live section of the cockpit. I'm going to stop this video, and when we come back, I'm going to show you now some of the special features that are unique to Neptune. So hopefully you'll join me in our next video. Welcome back to low-code Fiori applications using Neptune software. I'm your instructor, Matthew Hunt. And we're at the end of our cockpit overview. I'm going to show you some special features that are unique to the Neptune platform, specifically offline monitoring, the Neptune store, and then the Neptune community, which is really a great community of developers, architects who come together and collaborate, share ideas, help solve problems, that kind of stuff. So in this section, we will complete the following tasks: discuss how Neptune can make working offline easy. I'll show you how to monitor the performance of your applications. I'll show you the Neptune store, which I mentioned in a previous video. There's over 100 pre-built Neptune apps that you can download for free. And then I'll introduce you to that Neptune community. So first off, starting with offline and thinking offline first when you're building apps. So this is a unique feature to Neptune, something that Neptune does very well, and something that they're continuously awarded and recognized for. So part of building an offline app, there's three major challenges that you have to think about, and I've listed those three challenges here in the circles, and then over on the far right, I've kind of explained at a very high level the technology that Neptune's applying to overcome those. But if you think about an offline app on a mobile device, the first thing you got to think about is, how do you start the app when you're in offline mode? So say I'm a field service worker, I'm out working in the field, I have no Wi-Fi signal. How do I start a web app if I don't have access to the web? First off, they use something called the Cordova framework. And for those of you architects, people who are deep into technology, you might be saying, hasn't the Cordova framework kind of been unsupported in the past by Adobe? So the Cordova framework still exists, and what you're probably thinking of is, so Adobe had their front-end web UI called PhoneGap or PhoneGap Build, which was where developers would upload their packages, and the PhoneGap would build the hybrid web app for them. Okay, so PhoneGap has been discontinued, but the Cordova framework still exists. So when PhoneGap was discontinued by Adobe, what Neptune did so that we could still have these hybrid web apps is they developed their own portal. So you can go out to Neptune's portal. They have a service out there called Mobile Build. And you can, just like with PhoneGap, you can upload your application package to that, and that portal service will build your hybrid web app for you, just like PhoneGap previously did. The other thing you have to think about when working offline is the UI5 elements. How, if I don't have a connection to the front-end server, am I accessing the SAP UI5 libraries? Well, the short answer is the UI5 libraries are installed on the mobile device itself. So when the application starts, if it's in offline mode, it's really pulling those UI5 elements from the library that's installed on the mobile device itself. How do we make data available? Data that we need to run the app, or data that we're creating in the app, new data, if we're not connected. And so there's a technology called IndexedDB. This is storage that is created on the device itself. So I know that's a very simple question to maybe a simple answer to a complex question. But if you want to understand more of the architecture, if you just go out there and Google IndexedDB, you'll see tons and tons of articles that explain in very deep architectural verbiage how IndexedDB works. The other thing then, the other challenge is syncing with the backend. So once you do finally come in contact with a Wi-Fi signal, how does everything sync up? How do you keep from, getting data overwritten? Maybe multiple people have been using the app offline. How does it work? When is it the last one to sync up? Wins kind of. I can tell you that it comes down to a REST API technology. So there's an API on the Neptune platform. There's an API endpoint on the Neptune platform. The application is constantly trying to call that endpoint. When it finally does connect to that endpoint, then it's syncing up. So I know, like I said, that's a very quick overview to a very complex issue, but I can tell you Neptune is kind of the gold standard in these offline apps. Everybody else that's looking to do this is replicating this model that I just explained to you. Going back to the cockpit, we previously in the last video talked about the run engine. There's a tools. I'm not going to go into the tools. That's pretty self-explanatory when you get in there, and you can explore that on your own. Underneath monitoring, there's several options. You can delete the caching. You can control your user licenses. So you do have to purchase an end user license for Neptune, but those can be perpetual or they can be subscription-based licenses, and you can rename the user. So it is a named dialog user that's tied to the backend SAP dialog user. But if someone leaves the company or someone no longer needs access to the apps, you can delete that person's user ID to that license, and you can reuse those licenses. What I want to focus in here is in performance, and you see I've blown up the screen to the right, the performance screen within the cockpit. This is a really great tool for architects, decision makers, IT experts, people who are trying to figure out, how are the apps being used? What kind of performance am I getting, right? Like, what's the response time of these applications? So all this information is stored in Neptune, and you can call it up at any time by looking at the performance measurements. So you can see if I want to know the number of requests per hour, the average time it takes for a request to return, I can see those metrics from this monitoring tool. The Neptune store is where you can get pre-built apps. So here's what the store looks like. You can access the store through the cockpit itself. You log in there. It's got a menu tree by the same menu that the SAP GUI is built in. So you've got the logistics MM module, you've got inventory management, you got HR, you got production, you've got your tree over here, and then it's got all the pre-built apps underneath that. So you see I've got a purchase order approval app, I've got a purchase order create, an inbound delivery create app. And then the nice thing is I can actually, before I download it, maybe, I want to test it, right? There's a test feature here where I can actually test the app, and see how it looks and feels. So I can get a lot of information. I can see the app before I actually download it into my system. The next thing is the Neptune community. I mentioned this in a previous video, but this is just a great community out there. You can get the online documentation, which explains both Neptune editions, so the SAP edition as well as the Open edition. There's e-learning courses out there, so I think there's 5 or 6 e-learning courses. So if you're a developer, you're wanting to learn Neptune, you're not necessarily wanting to take the online. I'm sorry, not the online, but the in-person course that Neptune sells. Maybe you just want to take the free e-learning class. That's an option out there also. There's also a bunch of blogs. The Neptune developers a lot of times will think of a particular article that they want to write about, and they'll blog about it, and you'll see interaction from the Neptune community. And then there's also a place to post. So if you have a question like, how did someone else deal with this? You can write your post in there, and then people from the community will come in and comment. A lot of issues that I've come across that I just didn't know how to move forward with, I post out there, and there's always somebody, usually within 24 hours, that comes back and says, hey, here's how you fix that, or here's how you overcome that. And so this last slide here, I've just put some links out there for you. Neptune webinars and videos. There's a lot of Neptune stuff out there on the YouTube channel. But if you don't want to access YouTube, there's also a lot of webinars, white pages, case studies, videos, all that kind of stuff available on the Neptune website. I've added the URL there. And then the e-learning that I told you about. So if you're a developer and you're not quite ready to invest in a one-on-one type of course, you just want some free e-learning, that's available out there. And there's, I think, 5 or 6 courses that are available to you out there. So that kind of wraps up this video. I hope you've enjoyed learning some of these special features. And when we come back on the next video, we'll kind of go on to your S4 migration. Welcome back to Low-Code Fiori Applications with Neptune. I'm your instructor, Matthew Hunt, and we've come to our final teaching video, and this one is called S4HANA Migrations Made Easier. And my goal in this video is to help you with your S4HANA migration. As an enterprise architect, I collaborate with many other companies, peers of mine, and probably the biggest thing that I've heard in the last couple of years is, how is your S4HANA migration going? And probably the biggest challenge to that I hear from folks is, what do I do with all this custom ABAP code that I've written, custom Z screens, Z transactions? Do I really have to turn that into a Fiori application? Because the S4 HANA user interface is a Fiori interface for end users. They're not going into the SAP GUI like they do typically with ECC. It's a Fiori web interface. And so Neptune is able to help you with that journey, make that migration much, much simpler. And there's really 2 ways that they do this, and we've talked quite a bit about the first one, the low-code option. This is the traditional approach with the app designer. And this would be the tool that you use to recreate any applications, Z applications that you have in your current ECC environment that involve dialog screens, okay? And so those will require low code, but low code's still very easy with the drag and drop designer. There's also hundreds and hundreds of code snippets available in the app designer tool. So for example, if I want to create a mobile app that uses the camera on the mobile device as a barcode scanner, there's a code snippet in there that I can automatically just insert into my code. I don't need to know JavaScript because it's already been pre-written. I can insert it in there and boom, my application automatically is a barcode scanner. The one that I really want to focus in, though, is the second one, the no-code option. And so there's 2 tools in Neptune. There's the API Factory, which I've talked about already, and then there's the App Factory. Both of these are no-code functions within Neptune. And so what it is basically I can take any type of ABAP report, ALV report, and with no code, I can go into the Neptune cockpit, create, say I want to create a new tile or a new card, and over in the bottom right-hand screen there, I'm kind of showing you what this cockpit looks like. But I've chosen an ABAP report, and then I give the name of the ABAP report. This is the SE38 report in the SAP GUI transaction. Okay, simply activate that tile. And that's it. That's all I have to do, okay? It does not actually generate a new application. The API Factory is a runtime creation tool. So the good thing about that is if I go off and make a change to this ABAP report down the road after I've created this tile, if I've made a change to the ALV report, maybe added a new column to that report, I don't have to do anything new. Okay, the existing tile calls the API factory, and at runtime it generates that app based on the last save that you've done in the SAP GUI to it. So it's a great feature, great tool. And I'm excited to tell you guys or show you guys more about it. So here's an example I've done. So this is called a billing due list, an SAP billing due list, and this is an ALV report. On the right-hand side, you see the selection screen with all the selection parameters. I've got 3 tabs up there of parameters. So I've got a selection tab, a default data tab, and a batch update tab. If you look at the left-hand side, this is the Neptune app. I didn't do this. I didn't create this. I didn't do any code whatsoever. I just created a tile. I gave it the name of the ALV report or the ABAP report, and the API factory automatically generates this selection screen for me at runtime. If you look at the parameters, all the parameters line up. Sales organization, they're in both screens. Okay, and this is a very nice looking screen. It's not a bad looking screen in Neptune. The next one is the actual ALV report itself. And again, I've got the SAP GUI version on the right side and the Neptune app version on the left side. If you look at the data is exactly the same. If you went row by row through that, you would find that the information is exactly the same. So again, this is really helpful in people's S4 migrations. If you're wondering, what am I going to do with all this custom ABAP code? Here is a no-code way that you can convert those into Fiori apps. The last thing that I'll point out here is integration cards. So we talked about those dynamic tiles, those dashboards that you can create for executives. You can use the API factory to call those ALV reports in the background and produce for you with some type of schedule, like every 5 minutes you're running this ALV report, or every 10 minutes you're running this ALV report, and you can have it put in the tile itself, like a top 5 list or a top 10 list of the results that it returns. And you can you control the source, so you can determine how it knows what the top 5 or top 10 is. But this is a great way of adding ALV output into a dashboard. So I'm going to pause. This is the end of this video. I hope I've been able to encourage you of how Neptune can make your S4 migrations easier. When we come back, the final video will be a summary of everything that we've learned. So please join me in the next video.